History remembers the fire. It remembers the scream of the earth when the continents finally shattered. But memory is a kindness. It often blurs the terrifying silence that came before. Imagine a world where the night did not hold terror, but only beauty. This was the zenith of the Kaldorei Empire, the children of the stars. And at the center of their world, beating like the heart of a sleeping titan, lay the well of eternity. It was not merely water. It was liquid light. It was the blood of Azeroth herself, coalescing into a lake of violet energy that hummed a song of infinite potential. To look upon the capital, Zin-Azshari, was to be blinded by perfection. Spires of white marble and silver glass pierced the heavens, daring the twin moons to look away. The streets were paved with precious stones that vibrated with arcane power. The air smelled of ozone and ancient blooming flowers. It was a paradise, but it was a paradise built on a lie. The Highborne, the favored caste, they moved through these pristine halls like ghosts draped in silken arrogance. To them, magic was not a force to be respected. It was a birthright to be consumed. They drank from the well as if it were wine, never asking if the cup had a bottom. They believed that order was their invention, and that the chaotic energies of the universe existed solely to serve their whims. And above them all sat Queen Azshara, the light of lights. She sat upon her throne not as a ruler, but as a deity waiting for the universe to catch up to her magnificence. Her people loved her with a fervor that bordered on madness, and she loved them in return, as a collector loves a shelf of porcelain dolls. Beautiful, fragile, and entirely expendable, they stared into the depths of the well, watching the energies swirl, believing they were the masters of their own destiny. But they had forgotten the oldest rule of the dark. When you light a beacon in the void, you do not just illuminate your path, you announce your location to the predators. They thought they were gazing into a mirror. In truth, they were ringing a dinner bell for the end of the world. Perfection is a prison. When you stand at the summit of existence as Queen Azshara did, there is nowhere left to climb. There is only the long, crushing boredom of looking down. She was not merely a ruler. She was a narcissist of cosmic proportions. She looked at her people and saw pets. She looked at her empire and saw a dollhouse. She looked at the stars and found them lacking. It was in this vacuum of vanity that the whisper found her. It did not sound like a monster. It did not sound like an invasion. To Azshara, the voice of Sargeras sounded like the one thing she had never possessed, an equal, a mate, a being of such terrible golden power that he alone was worthy of standing beside her. She did not open the door to an enemy. She unlocked the gate for a suitor. And standing in her shadow was Azavius, the Lord Counselor, the man with eyes of amber and a soul of soot. He believed he was the architect of a new age, the broker of a deal that would elevate the Highborne to godhood. He was wrong. He was merely the first infected limb, the first to rot so the rest of the body could die. He listened to the whispers, of the Legion and called it wisdom. He looked at the corruption spreading through the tower and called it progress. But the timeline resists its own destruction. Just as the shadow began to lengthen over the palace, the universe violently corrected itself. It spat out 3 anomalies, 3 strangers from a future that was never meant to bleed into the past. Crassus, the dragon mage, trapped in a mortal form, stripped of his wings and his fire, desperate to save a queen who would eventually betray his kind. A human sorcerer, a species that did not even exist yet in the eyes of the elves, wielding magic with a raw, chaotic desperation that baffled the disciplined Highborne. And then there was the orc, Broxagar. To the elves, he was a monster, a beast, a jagged, green-skinned brute that marred the pristine aesthetic of their white city. They looked at his tusks, his scarred muscle, his rough hands, and they sneered. They saw something less than an animal, but Broxagar saw something far worse. He looked at the glittering spires of Zin-Azshari through the eyes of a veteran who had lived through the apocalypse these elves were about to invite. He had waded through the blood of the First, Second, and Third Wars. He knew the smell of burning cities. He knew the sound a body makes when it is crushed by a chaotic inferno. While the Highborne danced in their silk, sipping wine and discussing philosophy, Broxagar looked at them with a soldier's profound pity. He did not see the most beautiful civilization in history. He saw a graveyard. He saw walking corpses draped in jewelry, laughing on the edge of a blade. He was a ghost of the future, haunting the past. A warrior who simply wanted to die with honor, forced to watch the world commit suicide all over again. These three, the mage, the dragon, and the warrior, were glitches in the matrix. Sand in the gears of the apocalypse. They were the only ones who could hear the ticking of the clock. And in the golden halls of the palace, amidst the soft laughter and the chime of crystal, the ticking was getting louder. The trap was set. The bait was taken. The strangers were watching, and the door was about to open. The air in the queen's private chambers grew thick. It was no longer just magic. It was pressure, the kind of atmospheric density that precedes a natural disaster. Xavius stood at the edge of the well, his chosen sorcerers arranged in a precise geometry around him. Their chanting was a low, rhythmic drone, a vibration felt in the teeth and bone rather than heard by the ear. They were weaving the greatest spell ever attempted by mortal hands, pulling vast, shimmering threads. From the well of eternity to stitch open a wound in the fabric of reality. See you out. They felt powerful. They felt like gods remaking the universe. They had no idea they were just opening a vein. Then, the sensory shift began. It wasn't subtle. The soothing deep violet hum of the arcane curdled. The sound deepened into a wet guttural roar, like a great beast waking up angry beneath the earth. The light of the well, that pure, liquid starlight that had sustained an empire for millennia, began to sicken. Streaks of oily, viscous green, the color of gangrene, the color of radioactive rot, bled into the pristine blue waters. The two energies did not mix. They fought. The water boiled, hissing as the chaotic fell burned against the ordered arcane. The smell hit them next. Gone was the scent of ozone and ancient blooming night flowers. It was replaced instantaneously by the choking stench of burning sulfur, charred meat, and something else. Something ancient and unclean that tasted of copper on the back of the throat. The magic wasn't just changing, it was festering. In the center of the chamber, hovering above the swirling poisoned waters, the air ripped open. It was not a noble doorway. It was a ragged, screaming tear in the world. A vortex of swirling fell energy that looked less like a portal, and more like an inflamed eye staring out from a nightmare dimension. The heat coming off it was intense enough to blister skin. The golden tapestries hanging on the distant walls began to smolder. The polished marble floor hissed where sparks of green fire landed. The Highborne sorcerers paused, their chanting faltering, for a microsecond as the reality of what they had done washed over them. But it was too late. The invitation had been accepted. The first things through were not the golden god Azshara expected. They were not noble warriors. They were hunger given form. Great hulking beasts made of red muscle, and jagged black armor pushed through the rift. Fellhounds. They possessed no eyes, only gaping maws lined with rows of teeth that spun like grindstones. They didn't look at the magnificent Highborne with awe. They smelled magic. They smelled prey. They loped into the opulent room, their massive paws cracking the delicate moon tiles, drooling liquid fire onto priceless rugs woven from starlight. A young sorcerer, drunk on his own importance, and unable to process the horror, stepped forward. With a disdainful flick of his wrist, he wove a delicate net of arcane energy to bind the leading beast. It was a spell of exquisite complexity, designed to immobilize a dozen mountain lions. The lead fellhound didn't even slow down. It crashed through the magical barrier as if it were cobweb. The sorcerer had just enough time to look surprised, a mask of offended dignity, before the beast's jaws clamped around his midsection. There was a wet, sickening crunch, a short scream cut off by a rush of blood, and then silence, save for the wet sounds of feeding. The perfection of the Highborne shattered in an instant. Panic is a slow contagion in a room full of narcissists. They could not process that they were not in control. Then the escalation began. The ceiling of the palace, a dome of reinforced crystal and silver, exploded inward. A meteor of roaring green fire blasted through, impacting the center of the room with the force of a localized earthquake. The shockwave threw the Highborne against the walls like discarded dolls. From the smoking crater rose an infernal, a towering golem of fell-infused rock and green flame. It stood up, shedding debris, and let out a mechanical roar that shattered every remaining pane of glass in Zin-Azshari. Behind it, stepping calmly through the widening portal in the well, came the foot soldiers, the Felguard, tall armored champions of the Burning Legion, carrying massive two-handed axes that hummed with the same sickening energy. They formed a line, disciplined and terrifying. The room became an abattoir. The beautiful silks turned red. The golden floors became slick. The sophisticated screams of the dying mixed with the horrific, guttural laughter of the demons. It was not war. It was an extermination. And through it all, Queen Azshara sat on her throne, untouched. A dome of shimmering, impenetrable energy protected her, reflecting the green fire and the flying viscera. Yeah, she watched her loyal servants being torn apart with a look of mild distaste, as if someone had spilled wine at a perfectly curated dinner party. She looked past the carnage, past the dying screams of her people, staring hypnotized into the swirling green vortex. She was still waiting for her perfect mate to arrive. She did not see the end of her world. In her madness, she only saw the messy beginning of her ascension. The night did not end. It was murdered. Zin-Azshari, the jewel of Kalimdor. The city of 10,000 lights was no longer a beacon. It was a pyre. The white marble, once cool to the touch, was now black with soot and slick with ash. The streets that had known only the soft tread of silken slippers now echoed with the iron clang of demon hooves. The pollution was absolute. The fell fire did not just burn wood and stone, it burned the air itself, leaving a vacuum that smelled of copper and old graves. The sky above the capital was choked by a swirling, sickly green storm, a bruise that was spreading outward, mile by agonizing mile, infecting the horizon. Far away, deep in the ancient forests, a young druid woke up screaming. Malfurion Stormrage did not hear the invasion with his ears. He felt it in his bones. He felt the Earth Mother recoil, a spasm of pain that shot through the root systems of the world. The connection to the Emerald Dream, usually a place of serene slumber, had curdled into a nightmare. He looked at his hands and saw them trembling. He realized with a cold, sinking dread that the silence of the woods was not peace. It was holding its breath. The Highborne had sought to touch the divine. They had wanted to elevate themselves above the muck of the mortal coil. Yes. They succeeded. They tore the roof off the world to let the gods in. And now, the sky was falling on all of them. The map of Azeroth was being rewritten in fire. Yeah. The old boundaries of nations, of castes, of petty squabbles, they were incinerated in the first hour. Now, there were only two factions left on the face of the planet, the living and the burning. But the forest is not empty. In the shadows of Highborne, the wild gods are stirring. Cenarius has felt the tremor. The time travelers have found their bearings. The resistance is ragtag, terrified and hopelessly outmatched. But they are awake. The golden cage is broken. The slaughter has begun. And as the first Felguard steps out of the burning city and plants a hoof on the soft grass of the wild, the war of the ancients truly begins.